Welcome to the County Conversations podcast, brought to you by the Florida Association of Counties Institute for County Government with support from the University of Florida's IFAS. In this podcast, we dive deep into the diverse and dynamic world of Florida's counties with engaging interviews and thought-provoking conversations surrounding the challenges as well as successes of Florida's counties. Each episode brings you first-hand perspectives from county commissioners, government officials, community leaders, and subject matter experts who are shaping the future of our state. We explore a wide range of topics from economic development and public safety to environmental conservation and emerging technologies. Our aim here is to provide a platform for knowledge sharing, collaboration, and inspiration for county officials and residents alike. Whether you're a county commissioner, government professional, or simply interested in understanding the local government landscape, we hope this podcast provides valuable insights and practical takeaways on all things counties.
All right, we're live, so to speak, and thank you for joining us for another edition of County Conversations. Today, we're joined by FACT corporate partner Ashbritt. They're a Florida-based company that specializes in emergency management and disaster response work. And they have a very strong footprint in the disaster debris removal world. And so joining us today to talk about their work in Florida, I'm pleased to introduce Ashbritt CEO, Brittany Perkins Castillo, who's been with the company since 2016. And like all of us, has seen the frequency and intensity of storms grow significantly in the last several years. And Brittany, your company has been absolutely essential in helping our counties recover, particularly in 2024. So I want to welcome you to our little podcast and ask if you could just tell us a little bit about your background. It's not always that somebody sets out to be in emergency management. People typically stumble into this field. So I'd really like to hear your story.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Good afternoon. It's great to be on here and be able to share a little bit about my background, about our company, and most importantly, how counties across Florida and citizens in Florida can be best prepared for future emergency and disaster events. So it's a pleasure and thank you again. I would say it's rare for people to seek out to be in emergency management, although there's a huge movement and growth in higher ed and technical training programs. So maybe in the future that'll change. But my background, I guess it's twofold, if you will. So Ashbritt is a family business. And we'll get into Ashbritt's background. So I grew up around emergency management, around the solid waste and debris management industries. But I started my career actually working in the Middle East. I did fundraising and program management for an international nonprofit. Then I moved over and did some of that work stateside before turning to law. In my career in law, I worked alongside prosecutors and both at the county level and at the state attorney general's office level, and then moved into private practice. I actually launched my own small law firm working primarily with people that had been survivors of sexual and domestic violence, both on the civil and the criminal representation side. And then I moved into the glorious world of government procurement and government contracts. And then I've been the CEO of Ashbritt for almost 9 years. And I guess I'll say, it's kind of my background, I would say, is in crisis management response, working, when I was an attorney more at the individual and system level, and now obviously more large scale in crisis response with the logistics management and disaster side.
So can you tell us how Ashbritt got started? I didn't realize the range of services you offer. You're well known in the debris field, but I'd be interested just to hear about how the company got started.
Absolutely. So how we got started is critical to the culture of the company we are today. So I'm always really proud to share the story. So my mother, born in Cuba, my father grew up in South Florida. And my father started a small landscaping business. And I like to say, he said he hit it big when he finally got a contract to do a Pizza Hut and a Taco Bell. So this is old, brick and mortar Pizza Huts down in Miami in South Florida. And then Hurricane Andrew devastated South Florida. And so there wasn't landscaping to be done. There wasn't, commercial landscaping growth opportunities for the company at that point. So my parents, my father, they set out to do what a lot of local and small businesses do in our community. It's both, I need to make payroll. I've got bills to pay. I might have people employed. I got to figure out how to have generate income coming in from my small business. But it's also a desire to go out and help your community. And, now 33 years later, I'm proud to be the CEO of the company and see that same mindset in communities all across Florida. You've got small business people wanting to go help, be part of the recovery, and simultaneously find a way for their business to support the economic recovery and the physical recovery efforts. So we got started in 1992 after Hurricane Andrew. We were a subcontractor on that project, which was a federal mission at the time. And in the years since, grew into one of the largest companies in the United States. And as you said, known primarily our core business as the disaster debris management side, but really proud that we've got avenues of services that span across emergency services and government support programs.
Yeah, I mean, I saw you do staff augmentation. You can stand up a mobile kitchen in certain circumstances. Satellite improved communications for communities. So I was really surprised to see that range of services. But I do want to get into the big thing, which has hit all of our counties across the state. Maybe saved the Panhandle for 2024, but debris. I wanted to talk about debris and the company's footprint in Florida and what communities y'all currently serve. You don't have to name them all, but just generally.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the debris management has been at the forefront of Florida. Certainly in the last few years, you look back 2022 and Hurricane Ian, and unfortunately the Big Bend region and the Gulf Coast has been repeatedly impacted in the last few years. And the debris management's a big focus. So we work across cities and counties and with state agencies in Florida. Right now, we've got over 50 projects active in the state of Florida, across the Southeast, with the vast majority of those being in Florida. And it's a pleasure to serve those communities, but the debris management side certainly poses challenges for county government. And we look forward to continuing to support government in those efforts.
Can we talk about how communities procure those services? I think it's pretty standard now where a county or a city will get a pre-disaster debris contract in place. I don't think that was always the case, particularly back in the 80s and 90s. But how does a community decide to procure services through pre-storm? And I'm going to assume that even after a storm, they're scrambling sometimes because they didn't realize how big their needs were.
Absolutely. I think Florida's in a really great spot and certainly a national leader in procurement for government contracts around emergency and disaster events. That's certainly in the debris management space. I'm going to give a shout out. I'm almost positive that Boca Raton, Florida, which is just north of where I'm sitting right now, was the first, if not one of the first communities in Florida to have a pre-position contract. And so I think in the last 20 years or so, as you said, and so the Florida certainly leads the country, and you've got almost, I'd say a significant amount of towns and cities across Florida, certainly most, if not all counties, having contracts in place, but not only for debris management. You're seeing a huge movement after COVID to have logistics, whether that's turnkey temporary housing, whether that's base camps for utilities, first responders, staff, law enforcement that come in from other jurisdictions to support temporary fuel, temporary power, food, ice, water. The procurement teams in county government and particularly large cities, but really across the state of Florida, I think are quite robust and sophisticated. And that's putting the citizens of Florida in a really good spot for safe and efficient recovery, but also from a fiscal perspective of being able to pull down as much money from the federal government when you've got a federally declared event that FEMA is financing and supporting.
I'm glad you mentioned logistics. I was over in Bay County a couple of weeks ago, meeting with the county manager over there, Bob Micah, and he talked about that every community is going to have some sort of logistics, but they want to be less dependent on the state and putting in mission assignments. He wants to have his own logistics operation there so they can stand on their own. And they really needed that, I think, after Hurricane Michael, when they were just shut off from the rest of the world. So,
Well, and you probably don't know this, but yeah, Bay County is actually a client where we do support their logistics services. And I say, so I think Bay County has shown tremendous leadership, as you just spoke to. And I believe they were the first, if not one of the first counties to put out a comprehensive logistic pre-disaster procurement. And I think what counties hopefully know, but I'll share, is I think the state of Florida under Director Guthrie's leadership has made huge movement to having models and template procurements in place for local government to utilize either as a copy and paste or as a model to build off of. And that's certainly true in the logistics space and moving more so in the debris management space as well.
yeah, you're right. He is a very interesting person because he comes from that traditional response world. You know, he was in law enforcement and then he's worked his way up into EM. But I've noticed him at least within the last 4 or 5 years, and it's on the tail end of a lot of communities getting their money pulled back through clawbacks from FEMA. He wanted to make sure that communities understand how to procure effectively for particularly debris. And then they've created this FROC evaluation audit system, a pre-audit system, if you will. So I think he is really unique and has done a really good job of ensuring that communities can, get a debris contract in place, get the contractors in there, and get reimbursed.
Absolutely. And that's what's most important, right? Safe and efficient for the citizens of the local government, for the audience of this podcast, and certainly the priority, safety and efficiency. But we have to be realistic that the fiscal prudence and fiscal responsibilities of county leadership is equally important right after safety of their citizens. And I agree with you. The state of Florida's got great resources. Last year, there was an inaugural training that was really substantive and robust. I was able to participate for about a day and a half. And I hope that county leadership across Florida, if they're not familiar with the new Florida DEM training, looks into that. There's also great resources to have staff from the state come in and provide that technical support immediately after a storm, but also year round and advising on your procurements. And so while that's certainly something the private sector can do by sharing models from other neighboring jurisdictions or even other states for procurement departments and counties to analyze what best serves their jurisdiction, it's something that the state does have really robust programming, and it's certainly to the benefit of Florida.
I don't know if you have an answer for this, and I don't know the answer. I just know it's a challenge in certain circumstances with respect to cash flow. In order to pay the debris vendor, there might be some cash-strapped communities that don't have the cash readily available to pay their debris vendor. Do you have any thoughts or experience with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to answer this one from really two angles. I'm going to start with how the industry works and then talk about some best practices that allow that cash flow from the government side. But I love talking about our industry because I think it's really unique. It's not, maybe in Florida, people think about it, more day to day, but it's really not something until you're faced with a crisis that you consider the nuts and bolts of. And so in the emergency management space nationally, there's really about 5 companies that do the vast majority of work across the United States. Ashbritt being one of them, being one of the 2 largest really in the United States. And that's from the debris management, but also extends, we talked a little bit about logistics. We've always provided some of those services over our 33-year history to government clients where we might also be working debris and they have a need for temporary fuel, temporary power. But in 2021, we created a separate entity, a sister entity, ABML, and that's really seen significant growth. And I think that comes to because of the shared reputation, the shared culture, and mission for excellence that people know of Ashbritt now in the logistics, and whether that's infrastructure, construction, CDBG programs, et cetera. But back to the question at hand from a financing, small business participation is so important for the recovery. At Ashbritt, we say that the physical recovery and the economic recovery really need to be hand in hand. And so we're really thoughtful on how to engage those local and small businesses. Certainly you heard that's how we started as a company. We got an opportunity to participate in Hurricane Andrew, and it was life-changing. trajectory for not only our family, but for many of our team members who've been at the company over 20 years and the communities we serve today. So from a cash flow perspective, I wanted to address that cash flow is tight in the debris management emergency response. We have over 100 and I think $30 million worth of payables right now that are well over 60 to 90 days. And that's just the reality for emergency response. And so when people look at the market and say, hey, there's a handful of companies, cash flow and the way that money runs on federally funded missions from the federal government through the state to the local governments is a significant delay. And I just want to give some perspective. That's one of a few reasons is why you have the market so limited. And I'd say, yeah, of course, I represent our company, but I think if you look at the handful of companies, you've got good people that serve cities and counties throughout Florida in the debris management market as a whole, for sure. So I'll pause there, but then I'll talk a little bit about what governments can do. But I think the cash flow perspective is so interesting to me because it really is intimately tied into why you see a handful of companies supporting most governments across the state of Florida.
Go ahead. I'm going to let you go ahead and finish the other.
Yeah. So I think that what government, we talked about procurement, it's everyone's maybe least favorite topic. It's not always the most exciting thing, but having a legal background and also maybe appreciating that that's how emergency management, it turns on legal authorities who has fiscal ability to pay. And really all that comes down to solid procurement. So I think what local governments in Florida can be really attuned to what their contracts look like, and being able to expedite the contracting and the paperwork and pull down on those expedited funds that the state of Florida and that FEMA allows. The director and FDM's FROC program is a phenomenal program to get more cash into cities and counties accounts on an expedited nature. I think it's something that the other states and hopefully maybe even federal agencies start modeling some of the success that has been piloted and put into practice in Florida.
Did the state, I know the state had doing a special appropriation, might have been last year and the year before, for Lee County and its recovery. They basically put a whole bunch of money up front for, I think it was mainly operations, but has the state done something similar to that just for debris? In other words, a funding source that the community can access, knowing that they're going to be reimbursed by FEMA later. So the vendor is able to continue cleaning up the debris in the community.
Yeah. Well, I'd say two things. I don't know that, and that the cash flow is keeping efficient operations from happening. I think because the market exists where you've got larger companies that can come in, similar to Ashbritt. Like I said, there's about 5 companies in the United States and 5 companies that have the vast majority of support to local governments in Florida. And that's because these companies, first of all, have a record of performance. They can float, right? They can pay, we pay our vendors, on terms, whether it's weekly, 14 days, or every 30 days, depending on the contract and the size of the company. And so you've got companies that are able to perform the services over a period of time, and understanding that in emergency management, there's usually a significant lag in cash flow. What I'd say for counties and local government is that might be a necessity, but there's also ways to ensure that your local small minority veteran-owned businesses are being integrated into the project. It might not be feasible for them to be a prime contractor, but there's certainly ways that you can ensure that those contractors, those local small businesses, are actively part of the recovery, that are sharing in not only the work, but of course in the financial recovery piece as well.
So do y'all partner with any local vendors, like local small scale debris haulers?
I'm so glad you asked. I'm really proud. So we do across the board. We've got really a team that's really robust year round in identifying, working at the individual business level, but through the chambers, through the county governments that have offices to help you identify those partners. But I'll share, back in 2022 in Hurricane Ian, we were tasked, as we are now in 2024, as the FDP's prime contractor managing all the waterway recovery in the state of Florida. And we met with and identified some of the local fishing captains that were out of work because of the impact of Southwest Florida. And so whether it was fishing captains or the tourism industry, we ended up engaging a significant amount of fishermen and boat captains to come out and help us navigate the mangroves. Right? These are people that know the waters. It's their livelihoods. They know it like the back of their hand. And so from, an operations planning perspective, from an environmental stewardship and legal risk management perspective, we brought in the best of the best to come support in their own backyard. And fast forward today, a lot of those same contractors are still working with us in 2024 now on the waterways, certainly in Southwest Florida, but also in the Big Bend and across the state. And it's been a huge impact to be able to help people rebuild businesses that were destroyed, personal property that was destroyed. And again, I can't say enough, it's also that pride in leading recovery efforts for yourself, for your neighbors, for your community.
That's interesting. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole on this one, but you just brought it up, the waterway recovery, which I guess the Fish and Wildlife is involved in that in some respects, DEP.
Yeah.
This isn't derelict vessels. This is other stuff. This is just junk that's been thrown into the canals. Is that?
So it's a mix. Fish and Wildlife has the primary responsibility for derelict vessels. And so our contracts with DEP that's supported by DEM is for debris in the water, whether that's vegetative, construction, demolition. We will do titled property, and that's something that DEP works closely with Fish and Wildlife to have a demarcation on lanes of responsibility. But after Hurricane Ian in particular, there was significant amount of titled property in the mangroves. So we had a really interesting mission with DEP and DEM to airlift vehicles out of the mangroves. So in order to not disrupt wildlife, there's some phenomenal videos and footage.
I haven't seen that.
Of that. Yeah. So that was interesting. And right now in fallen trees that might disrupt either marine traffic or water flow and the like.
Yeah. My famous story is touring Monroe County after Hurricane Irma and seeing a Winnebago in a canal, maybe a couple of them.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
It really is. And so there's a significant amount of that work that happens in our, in certainly in the bays and the open water, but also, of course, in the canals. And when you come back to talking about governments and planning, I think that's Ashbritt's found great success in local and small business hiring for that specialty work. We talked about the waterways and hiring the boat captains and the fishermen. But even if you think of somewhere like Fort Lauderdale, certainly the Tampa Pinellas area where you've got lots of neighborhoods with intercoastal behind homes, you've got the finger canals and area. Those are places where small trucks, we've got the fleet of national big storm that come in, but in those neighborhoods from ingress and egress and logistics, you want the smaller local dump trailers and local businesses. And so that's a great way when government's thinking through their knowledge of their community. There are some places where the big everyone wants the big storm trucks, but the reality is efficiency in your community might look very differently from particularly, like we said, somewhere like Fort Lauderdale, the Pinellas area where you've got all those beach towns that have particular needs of smaller vehicles. And a lot of that can be found in the local contracting communities.
Is that normally part of your procurement process? Do you spell that out in there, or maybe not specifically naming a local vendor?
I think there's a good model for local minority business participation across all sorts of procurements and government beyond the emergency space. I'm of the opinion it can be more robust. I think some counties do really well and hold people accountable. I think some jurisdictions, it's just part of a process that's been done for some time. So I'm always of the opinion that in our field that I can speak to in emergency management and disaster removal, there's ways to get more people, more local and small businesses trained up and participating. I think it's something that county government should be thoughtful on continuing to press forward and that standard of excellence. So
can you just address like boots on the ground? So at the county level, who's the person that's helping coordinate the debris with the vendor, with Ashbritt?
Absolutely. I think, we talk about emergency management, and certainly the ABML side, which is our management logistics side, deals much more closely with actual emergency managers and emergency management departments. So again, base camps, temporary housing, temporary power, temporary fuel, food, ice, water, infrastructure services. That's going to be more with emergency management. From debris, it's the great people in a lot of our public works and solid waste offices across the state. Sometimes Parks and Rec, for sure, but largely you're going to be in your solid waste and public works. And there's such tremendous expertise across the state of Florida. And I definitely want to give acknowledgement to the people that work in those areas to really identify not only the procurement we've talked about, but land is a valuable resource in Florida. When you think of densely populated areas, certainly South Florida, where I'm sitting, being one, these are people that have their communities identified, know where you can have temporary staging sites, know where your final disposal is. And that's difficult in Florida. And so those are people that are doing great work year round in our communities.
Yeah, I spoke to one of the deputy administrators for Lee County last week at our conference, and he indicated that, after Hurricane Ian, they had, let's say, 53 plus temporary disposal sites for the debris. Excuse me, this was after Irma.
Right.
And then, so when Ian came, a lot of those sites weren't county owned. They were, privately owned, and they volunteered. Yes, so maybe it was a hospital says, yes, you can use this for disposal site. He said, now that land is now developed. They don't have access to that anymore. So that's a challenge. Did you see that in any place during this year where, hey, we need to find another disposal site because this is more debris than we ever imagined?
All the time, all the time. I can think of an example in Collier County, although the team there from their solid waste, emergency management, and real estate team, it's something they've been looking at in partnership with us year round, but it is a challenge. And so I think Florida is unique, obviously, to maybe more rural communities in Georgia or Alabama or Mississippi, where land's much more plenty. And so we have different challenges. It's longer haul distances. It's being more collaborative in partnership with your contractor, looking at lease agreements year round, going into the storm. And it's exactly what you said. What's available 1 year, 1 year for a storm might not be available 3, 6, 9 months later in preparation for the next season. And I think that's a great point to really mention. And I think people in Florida know this well. Emergency management is a collaborative endeavor. It's collaborative across levels of government, from local, state to federal. And it's collaborative because partnerships are needed. Some jurisdictions in Florida have more robust force account labor, certainly that can help with emergency push or smaller events. But other communities need to bring in partners in the contracting community. And that's the model of most Florida. And so I always accept opportunities to come on podcasts and talk, because I think that government and private sector, while have their independent roles, and there should be certainly checks and balances, more collaboration is needed and more reliance in the planning and pre-event stage for how each can use its role to strengthen the ultimate recovery for the citizens in that community.
Well, I want to get into some of the philanthropic work that you are interested in and the work that you do. But before we do that, I did want to just ask you, because this was such a big year, what were some of the biggest challenges that you saw that counties were facing? And now we're going into blue skies. We have time to breathe and do things a little bit better.
Well, I'm gonna name the elephant in the room so that hopefully anyone who's still listening feels that I'm being honest and not just trying to, positively talk about Ashbritt. I think that our industry, Ashbritt included, the pricing market in Florida is really going to be a challenge. In 2024, I think because of the great leadership of the state of Florida and the governor between the two hurricanes, made decisions that were unique and really pushing forward and leaning forward to have as much expedited recovery between those two storms and continuing. And again, I think that was great leadership of the governor and of the different agency heads, and of course, Director Guthrie and the FDEM team. And the city and county market had to be responsive to that forward leaning in. And I don't know that the industry, contractors, cities and county were as ready to go ready, set, go with some of the great leadership leaning in at the state level. And so I think the challenge is price escalation. And do you go back to a pre-positioned market that's significantly lower than the market proved to be in 2024, where there was lots of rate changes higher in order to keep resources in Florida? And so I think in 2025 and certainly the first half of 2025, this is something that local government in partnership with their state reps and DEM are going to be grappling with. I think the contractor community should be part of that conversation across the board. And Florida counties should put themselves in a position of strength, knowing where we sit and our propensity to disaster events. But in 2024, you had, Georgia, South Carolina, the devastation significant in North Carolina, Tennessee, and Florida from just those two hurricane events. And Florida, again, put themselves in a position to maintain the resources needed. But I think it's going to be a really interesting question. What counties do? We've talked so much about procurement. Where do you settle that marketplace back in 2025 and beyond is a huge next phase for local state government to deal with.
So that was just a supply and demand issue, is what you're saying? Is it like the state wanted to lean forward, we're ready, but the demand outside of the Florida was equally as large. So
I think so. FDOT and FDEM were really robust in their post-disaster contracting. And again, I think that was great leadership shown, but the city-county market was planned for a different kind of fact pattern, if you will, where there wasn't always going to be the robust response at the state level. And so the state came in, showed great support that I think saved lives, certainly ensured the pull down of as much federal funds as you could for the state of Florida, which is great for our state. And it disrupted some, maybe unintentionally, the city-county market. And so it's settled out. But if the future of Florida is going to be expectations to potentially run debris operations 24/7, which was not historically something that was done, those are conversations counties need to have with their emergency management, with their solid waste. Is it reasonable? And then from a contracting standpoint, right? Contractors' expectations might not have built in 24/7 operations. Our insurance, OSHA requirements, ability to have not only resources, but also drivers. You can't run a driver 24/7 from a safety standpoint or a risk management standpoint. So those type of examples of leaning in, I think it's phenomenal that the state ran 24/7, but counties now need to understand, is that the new normal in Florida? And how do we adjust not only our contracts, but our plans accordingly?
So has that eased up? Is that 24/7 tapered off?
It settled in. It certainly settled in. There was a lot going on between the two storms and in the weeks after. And I think a lot of your listeners rose to the occasion with great success. And it went well for the state of Florida. And so the question is, what does 2025 look like? And how do we plan based on the reality of 2024 for future events?
We need to get you at one of our conferences. You need to be on a panel with us, because this is really, this is very important and very timely stuff. And I think our elected officials really benefit from hearing from you. So this has been great.
If it's not recorded, you have all sorts of other things to say. But I hope I'm saying enough to where you think it's valuable.
Absolutely.
When we talk about Ashbritt and certainly the core business of disaster debris management, you can tell I'm always happy to talk about the disaster debris management market, but I'd be remiss if I don't turn to share the growth of the market in Florida with logistics. We talked about the leadership of Bay County, other jurisdictions, Palm Beach County, cities like Fort Lauderdale are following suit and putting out these comprehensive logistics bid. I think Broward County's going to be doing so in 2025 as well. And I think that's great leadership. Redundancy in emergency management is certainly a key to success. And so local government should have their plans. You can always turn to and lean on the state whether it's for technical assistance, for funding, or for direct assistance. And of course, there's always the federal government that can come in similar lanes. But when you talk about logistics contracts, I guess examples of those, a great example is Fort Lauderdale City Hall. Fort Lauderdale had been devastated by those torrential rains that shut down the airport, now over a year ago. And City Hall, as you may know, was completely rendered not only unusable, but had significant damage to resources, to plans, to its server and infrastructure, or technological infrastructure. So Ashbritt had the debris management contract that also had a spectrum of ancillary services. Again, now we've procured a really robust document, but we came in and we did the temporary remediation of the facility to render it habitable, safe from an environmental standpoint for people to come in, do assessments of the building, retrieve core documents. And then long story short, we were contracted by the city to do the full demolition of City Hall, which was just completed. And so that's a project we're really proud of. Obviously marquee, lots of exposure being a city hall of a major city, but great kudos to the city of Fort Lauderdale leadership team that I think navigated that really well, from the storm response and the recovery of City Hall. But also on the logistics, I'll offer that we've had a base camp going for Governor DeSantis in Monroe County, supporting law enforcement that the governor is bringing in to support Monroe County sheriffs. You've got state law enforcement. On occasion, you'll have federal law enforcement supporting the Coast Guard, and that's from a border security, national security, state borders in Monroe County, and national security. And that's been ongoing and turnkey, and we're obviously proud to have a space for law enforcement to have safe and comfortable housing with what I hear is some pretty good meals and fresh fish on occasion.
What does the base camp look like?
The base camp has about 65 beds. They're all individual bunk trailers, which is something that I know the law enforcement on these missions are grateful for, having the individual. We've got a full laundry services, obviously shower and restroom facilities, and then a kitchen that's serving hot meals 3 times a day, and a little gym so that people on mission are making sure they're getting their exercise. So you've got mental health and some good meals to fuel the law enforcement missions in support, like I said, of the migrant observations with Monroe County Sheriff and state law enforcement.
I'm certain there are worse places to be deployed.
I visited on occasion, and I do think you've got a lot of people with seniority making sure that that's their rotation. But we welcome, the emergency management team and leadership in Monroe County. I know would have done tours for their counterparts across the state that are going to look at what a base camp looks like. The good thing about, other than, having a trip, everyone seems to schedule their tours on like Monday morning or, Friday afternoons, Monday morning. So there's a weekend in the Keys, it seems. But, I think that learning from your colleagues is so important. Obviously, Florida, we are disaster prone, but as lots of people retire and you've got more people coming into the industry, I know budgets are tight, but to the extent that we can go look at operations, whether it's operations with a tail, like some of the waterway work, whether it's a base camp that's set up for a non-hurricane purpose. So when it gets a little quieter, maybe in January, February, people can go look and observe what an operation looks like and bring, sometimes you need to see things to really be able to put them on paper as far as in plans and contracts. And so we welcome any opportunities for government. And whether it's our sites or another company in the industry that we might know about, it really doesn't matter. Getting eyes and ears on the ground and boots on the ground helps us all build more resilient plans and communities.
Totally agree. Just walking back real quickly to the growth in the logistics area, for those pre-disaster contracts, which one took place first, Fort Lauderdale or Bay County? And did Bay County do this on their own, or was there like some other state that they were looking at? Or I think Bob's just got a lot of experience.
Yeah, I think we've got really great leaders. I want to say, I don't have it in front of me, but I want to say that Bay County was certainly one of the first in Florida to put out a comprehensive contract. And you've seen other cities and counties also do so in Florida. The state of Florida has a very comprehensive logistics contract. I believe the state allows cities and counties to utilize that as a model as well. And so that's, again, great leadership that allows counties to not have to reinvent the wheel. But I would say our growth, and I can give you a little, I guess, taste of that. In 2024 alone, we had over 17 base camps with almost 3,500 beds, 3,500 beds placed in service, and operations in 4 states, Florida, Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. And our logistics team also does a lot of work for utilities. So that is a lot of growth, but I think that really comes to
Wow.
that COVID government continues to look to private sector partners for a lot of emergency services. And so you've just really seen a robust growth across the disaster response and emergency management industry. There's a lot of movement in the private sector in the space. And, if you really wanted to get into it, there's tons of private equity. Ashbritt's 100% family owned, but there's a huge movement of private equity money into the industry. And so, to the extent that, people want context, it's a really fascinating industry to kind of pull the layers of the onion, if you will.
Yeah. All right. Do you want to talk about
Briefly.
your women in the field of emergency management, since we're talking about the onion?
Yes, absolutely. So when I came on 8.5 years ago, certainly supporting women in business is something important because of the opportunities I've had in my career. The chairman and founder of Ashbritt's been really supportive of my leadership, as has our entire board. And it's just, we talked about a lot of retirements in emergency management, and at the same time, a lot more higher education and college programs encouraging students and giving the opportunity to explore emergency management. So you've got retirement and maybe more of a pipeline coming in. And I think that an opportunity for women to understand the exposure to the industry, or to support people already in the industry with career development, career transitions, is a popular topic, whether it's public to private or private to public, or within each of those sectors itself. And so we've grown. We had our first Women in Emergency Management event at a Texas conference in 2019. We do about 4 events a year since then. We've had thousands of people participate, and most importantly, a great reception from not only Florida, but the national emergency management community. And so it's something I'm passionate about. It's now something that's beyond me. It's got its own organization behind it. And I'll say 2 key projects. We launched our second round of grants to support training, professional development, or exposure to emergency management, and had over 60 applicants. And so that was huge for our second year. We were able to fund a good portion of those. And at the National Hurricane Conference, we are going to have the first ever Women in Emergency Management track in 2025, where people can engage with their colleagues on a whole host of topics. But I'll end by saying it's not just women. Some of our most ardent supporters are male leaders across the field that just recognize there's an opportunity for them, either in their hiring practices or in their leadership, to make sure that we've got people ready to serve in disaster response in our communities, men and women alike.
That's awesome. I mean, I think Florida's done pretty well. I remember Pasco County, their emergency management director, she's retired now, but she was a female. St. Johns County, the current Monroe County emergency management director, Shannon.
Shannon's great. And Sarasota County, Florida's got phenomenal talent in our leadership pool. Again, men and women alike. And engaging in women emergency management has been a really way to find not only mentorship and career development opportunities, but it's been a really way, I think, for people to collaborate in friendships and in breakfast and happy hour events. And certainly, like I said, support some of that grant funding for more professional development. So I'm just grateful that it's something I've been able to be a part of, and that we've had such great support from the public and private sector alike.
Great work. That's awesome. The other issue that I saw was Stronger Than the Storm. I don't know if you want to talk about that real quickly.
I'm so grateful. Ashbritt has such a phenomenal team that I get to pursue initiatives that I am really passionate about. and support, of course, our team members in doing the same. And so we talked about women in emergency management. My other key passion area is supporting kids and families in disaster response. So Stronger Than the Storm is our 501c3 nonprofit that's mission is to create play-based, kid-friendly resources to engage and support kids in planning for and responding to disaster events, but also, and really importantly, is to be that connector and facilitator so that kids and planning for kids and disaster response is really integrated into all of our government and private and public sector emergency planning. And so we launched about a year and a half ago. We've got 2 books. You can see one on the shelf. Well, I guess
I do see it.
you can see 2 books. But what's really important, if you go to our website for those listening, is we do have an activity book that's great post-event for shelters, for schools, and where it's been used a lot, but also for planning fairs. But we've got a whole host of free downloadable resources. We call it our Family Emergency Preparedness Campaign. And we take a lot of best practices. We just launched a heat campaign earlier this summer. We're doing our winter campaign and winter safety right now. And so the idea is that they're free resources that are set up to be social media graphics and or coloring pages that you can download and be able to have kind of play-based, engaging materials, right? If any of us just see a list of what not to do, our eyes glaze over it. So we're really trying to condense that information in a way that's accessible and memorable for kids and families. And the last thing we're doing is really helping governments think through, again, kids and families. So we've talked a lot about the private sector perspective, but what I focus on is so much of the federal money that comes down ends up with a contractor, right? As kind of like your end user, if you will. And it surprises me how often people, and this was referenced earlier, are nervous to engage the contractor. And I'm like, well, if you just ask me, I have 22 states worth of logistics contracts, and only one contract that requires us to be able to service kids talks about, kid size hand washing stations, right? You talk about health and safety, but you don't even give away that kids can reach a hand washing station to wash hands. And then you look at, I was part of a task force with Health and Human Services for the Afghan refugee crisis. And you looked at all these contracts where you couldn't even get baby food and formula, yet you had contracts for food that contemplated kids. And so I just think with more coordination and collaboration, we could realize some of the gaps we have in our response plans that specifically talk about kids, and also maybe have more collaborative solutions. And so I'm really committed to trying to bridge that gap. Because we sit in the private sector, I think we can help share information maybe a little quicker and faster. And so in the last year, we've really built up a robust website, and we continue to do so. We're getting tons of requests for teen-focused information. It's a really fun age group to support. And so in 2025, we're going to really focus on building that out. But it's a labor of love. And in all of my work, whether it's, my day-to-day CEO of Ashbritt, whether it's through Women in Emergency Management, or through Stronger Than the Storm, I am so, I guess, struck by the tremendous amount, as we said, of talent in our government and our emergency response framework and nonprofits. So I'm very positive day to day. There's market challenges, like we said, in debris management, particularly in Florida for 2025. But I think through collaboration, I know from what I know of the contractor community and certainly of Ashbritt, people want to be part of the solution and collaborative, and Florida leads the way, and I think we'll continue to do so in the future.
Well, you are an awesome cheerleader for your industry and emergency management and women in the field of emergency management. So this has been great. Thank you for doing this. It was beyond what I expected. I learned a lot from you, which I should have. And I really think we would love to invite you to one of our conference and get you on a panel. Let's talk about this stuff. This is great.
I love talking about our industry. Although I just realized I have a call with the federal government contracting officer. We're doing all of the core. So you might know this, city, county, state government, we talked about obviously here. federal government, Ashbritt holds the largest contract ever given to one company for Department of Defense, Army Corps of Engineers, 25 US states, including every hurricane state. And so we were activated for all of North Carolina and all of Georgia when both governors asked the federal government to come in. And the government likes to switch people every 30 days on rotation. So we've got our new team coming in. So
we'll take that call.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to
All
switch out people every 30 days.
All right. Brittany, thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Nice to meet you.
Same here. Bye.
Bye.